Family detention policy may be back on the table.
People need to understand it's not in we say detention, but it's not in a jail setting. This is actually an open air campus, family type facility that is open air, right? So we're not talking about razor wire and a penal institution, things like that. They have childcare, they have education and programs.
There is no such thing as a soft detention site. There's no humane way of detaining children in prisons, because that's what it ends up becoming, even if it's a tent structure.
President-elect Trump has promised deportation on a mass scale starting as soon as he steps into office, as concerns over family separations remain high.
Do you worry, though, that you will actually be separating children from their parents and punishing children for the actions of their parents?
Our plan, we have no plan to separate children from parents. The parents will have to make a decision. That's parenting 101. I'm going to say it again. If you choose to have a child here in the United States while you know you're here illegally and you know you're on a court order to deport, that's on you.
A 2023 consent decree between the Biden Department of Justice and the ACLU banned family separations for 8 years.
Do you believe the decree needs to be reexamined?
I think, yeah, we need to re-examine that, see if it makes sense from a national security perspective.
All right, let's discuss this more with Sam Stein, managing editor for The Bulwark and MSNBC political contributor, Eugene Daniels, White House correspondent for Politico, and Democratic strategist and New York Times opinion contributor Chuck Rocha. He's also the co-host of the Latino Vote podcast and president of Solidarity Strategies. Great to have all three of you with us. Sam, we'll start with you. I mean, we're already seeing fights with individual cities and states over deportation policy. You saw Thomas Homan there take a dig at San Diego. Just this week, Homan was been sparring with Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker and the mayor of Chicago as well. How much can local, state, and city governments hinder Trump's mass deportation plans, if at all?
Well, it depends, right? I mean, obviously, local authorities are necessary to actually implement the most severe elements of what the Trump administration, incoming Trump administration, wants to do. There's just not enough federal forces or federal law officials who can handle all of this. So to a degree, if the Trump administration wants to execute their plans to the stated objectives, they are going to need localities to participate. And if localities choose not to participate, then they can't do it. That said, if you listen to that segment that led into this, I mean, we should expect protracted legal fights. Earlier, Thomas Homan had hinted that he would just force mayors who didn't comply to comply or potentially arrest them. So if you take them at their word, right, and I generally think we should take them at their word, you could end up seeing pretty severe clashes really early on in the Trump administration. I'm talking about, day 2, day 3, where we see local mayors, governors even, basically saying, no, you cannot usurp the authority of our National Guard. No, you cannot take over the authority of our local police. And then we're in uncharted territory. It's unclear. It'll have to get litigated, one presumes, but it's unclear exactly how that will be decided and adjudicated.
Chuck, what's your reaction to Homan saying that family detention will be reinstated?
I think it brings back a lot of horrific images of what we lived through 4 years ago. I own the largest Latino-owned firm in the country. 2 of my business partners are immigrants. Daisy, who is an immigrant from El Salvador, who's been with me over 7 years, will make more money than a congressman this year, pay more taxes than a congressman. Her TPS runs out in March, and she's been told she has to deport or she becomes, quote unquote, a criminal in this country. What does that say about a young woman who's been here for 22 years, who's went to college here, who graduated with honors, who don't even smoke and drink? Hell, she's a better American than I am. And we're asking her to deport. I think this is some of the reaction you're going to see from across the board from lots of folks.
Eugene, I want to read you some political reporting about California farmers. The country's largest agricultural constituency backed Trump back in November, bucking California's deep blue electorate over his campaign promises to open the faucet and deliver more water to the state's parched, conservative-leaning Central Valley. But now it is reckoning with an uncomfortable contradiction. Trump also campaigned on mass deportation of undocumented immigrants, who make up at least half of the state's agricultural workforce. Are Republicans or Trump officials worried about this potential collision course that they have set themselves on?
Yeah, they don't seem worried, right? But I think they probably should be, right? When you look at exactly what my colleagues just reported, there is going to be kind of a reckoning if this actually takes place, right? If there is truly some kind of mass deportation, whether it's the full 11 that Trump is always talking about, or a few million of the folks that could or likely happen in the first few months, first year or so, you're going to see Republicans look around, actual voters on the ground, a little more confused because they don't always understand the impact of the rhetoric. They don't always understand and really care sometimes that the things that they're voting for are going to happen, right? We often look at voters. I talked to a voter in 2018. He was a soybean farmer. And when Trump was having his China tariff fight and going back and forth, this guy lost thousands and thousands of dollars. And I asked him if he blamed Donald Trump. He said, no. I think we're going to see some of these same kind of things. It depends on how big the issues actually get. And then Donald Trump himself clearly seems worried about kind of public blowback. In his interview with Kristen Welker at Meet the Press, he talked about the kind of, it might not look good for us if these kinds of things happen. So he seems to understand that whether or not his team understands it or really even cares because they made these promises, that's yet to be seen.
To kind of draw on that point, Sam, do you expect that voters will make the connection? Because it wouldn't just impact agriculture. Experts have been warning that mass deportations would just be an economic disaster across the board. Previous industries that have been cited, the services, tourism, agriculture. Will voters make the connection between immigration and the economy?
I don't know if they will directly. It's interesting because if you remember, even before the election, Elon Musk was outlining what the Trump plan would be. And one of the things he said was people should expect short-term pain economically. And that was sort of a bizarre thing to say if you want to get elected. But of course, it worked. People still elected them. But I think he was trying to lay the predicate for people to say, okay, well, maybe prices have gone up, but I know they have a plan, right? I know that they have reasons for what they're doing. And what we've seen is that partisanship, tribalism is sort of this all-encompassing force that can overcome what would traditionally be bad politics and bad optics. That said, if there was one issue that really determined this election, it was the price of goods. And if we know anything, ripping farm workers, or not just farm workers, but people throughout the economy out of their jobs will obviously have an adverse impact on the price of goods. And I do have to believe that if in 4 or 5, 6 months' time, the price of your grocery bill hasn't gone down, it's gone up, that people say, you know what, Donald Trump did promise me this thing. He was pretty consistent about this thing, and I'm going to hold him accountable for that.
Chuck, I want to go back to what Thomas Homan was saying in that interview with Sam Brock, in which he talked about his family detention policy, putting the onus on parents who may have come into this country without proper documentation or unlawfully, and then having children here. When he talked about putting them in family detention centers, he was kind of being very specific about, oh, these won't be penal institutions. They're going to be open air facilities. And I was trying to think of, what does that actually mean? I mean, in what scenario is the detention of a family or children in any setting, in any context where they cannot move freely, anything but a prison?
To me, it sounded like an open air prison. And I think everybody took it as that. That's exactly what it sounds like. And let's be clear. There may not be another presidential election for 4 years, but there's going to be a congressional election in less than 2 years. Sam and Gene's been reporting on this with some great reporting on what we're looking for, Democrats in peril, what's going to happen. I'll tell you one thing, as a non-reporter, as somebody who runs campaigns for a living every day, you start putting American kids with undocumented parents in jail and deporting them, you're going to see a visceral reaction back to a place where we haven't seen in a long time, because folks don't want to see American citizens put in open air penal institutions. They want to see our America here that we built this country on. Sure, we should send bad people back, but 99% of all immigrants came here just like my parents did to build a better life, and they don't want to see kids in jail.
Eugene, let's talk about the contrasting messages between Biden and Trump. Obviously, a big question. Trump threatening other countries, his political rivals. Biden calling on Americans to seek the light of liberty and love. What is the rhetoric signal about where we are going as a country? I mean, I know that President Biden is leaving his term in office. He's thinking about his legacy, but also the moment that we find ourselves and what he can do in his remaining weeks in office.
I mean, it tells you that's going to be just a little bit different come January 20th, both rhetoric and in policy. I mean, in all seriousness, you know, there aren't many people who we could put side by side that have a different view or different tone when it comes to governing than Donald Trump and Joe Biden, right? Joe Biden, you know, kind of always likes to talk about our better angels and in those terms. That's not how Donald Trump operates. We have saw it for 4 years. We've seen it since he came down that escalator at Trump Tower. That's not going to change. So I think what everybody should kind of gird themselves for is the chaos. Some of it is part of the point, right? The fighting back and forth is the point. The, you know, saying Justin Trudeau is the governor of the 51st state of the United States is the point, right? It is about showing strength over anything. It is about doubling down, even when the facts sometimes don't comport with what you're saying. It is about making sure that everyone understands that the view that you have is the view, period. And that's something that is a little bit different than we've seen the last 4 years. And what we know about Donald Trump is he likes to be in the center of the media ecosystem. He loves us talking about him. We are going to have to. He's president. So he's going to find ways for that to continue. And that's a lot of what you're seeing with, you know, the talk about the Panama Canal or Greenland in Canada.
You know, Chuck, I think of some of the kind of historic farewell addresses that have been made by outgoing presidents, perhaps most notably, not just George Washington, but even Eisenhower's warning about the military-industrial complex. Is there a moment for Joe Biden to deliver a speech of that magnitude? And if so, what should it contain?
It should talk about the things that you're just talking about. We all saw the acceptance speech Donald Trump gave to us when he first got elected, talking about all the negativity, which would be the same as his campaign. And for my Republican friends out there, they can say that, yes, but he still got elected. That's fine, but it gives Biden a chance in his final word to rise above it. And one of the things tying back to this immigration policy he could do is he could extend TPS and DACA for a bunch of kids who came here with parents at no benefit of themselves to countries they've never been back to if they're asked to leave. So those kind of things are easy. 90% of the country agrees with it, and to go out magnanimously, if I can say them big old words right, and do it above and beyond and talk about democracy and bringing this country back together.
Sam, your thoughts. I mean, what is not just the rhetoric of what Biden does in the next couple of weeks, but what does he need to say to prepare the country for the moment that he and certainly the vice president when she was running were warning us about, that, you know, Donald Trump certainly presented a campaign that was fascistic and was a threat to our democracy.
Yeah, well, first off, I'm surprised Eugene doesn't want to own Greenland. Having worked with Eugene, I figured he'd be more on board with that, but we'll let that one slide. You're more of a Panama Canal guy. Secondly, as for what Biden can say, I mean, I don't want to be too negative about it or cynical about it, but I don't really know if he can say anything. Honestly, you know, for better or worse, he's leaving on a fairly dour note. He made the central case of his presidency the preservation of democracy, and then Kamala Harris picked up that argument. And obviously, more Americans voted against that.